One question for each game. Houston at Jacksonville. Big game for CJ Stroud, Jamey?
Potentially, had almost a 20-point game last week, and turnovers were a problem. But I think anytime Nico Collins is on the field in a plus matchup, you're going to feel comfortable about CJ Stroud. To what degree remains to be seen, because it's been a disappointing season for him. But I do think, given the fact that Jacksonville is number one in most fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks, an opportunity potentially for a shootout here if Trevor Lawrence does play, given how bad Houston's defense has performed and the injuries in the secondary. I kind of like this spot for CJ Stroud. So I would start him over both guys in the Thursday night game of Tua Tagovailoa and Jordan Love.
I would start him over Tua. I don't have him over Love.
Okay. Would you start him over Jared Goff, CJ Stroud, or Jared Goff?
Goff. I have Goff higher.
Okay.
But
I would also start him over both the quarterbacks in the Thursday late afternoon game.
Would you?
There is potential for a breakout game. This is the slump buster for CJ Stroud. Like he's ready to remind us who he is.
Yeah, hope so. Okay, I have a good stat about Tank Dell when we get to that game in a little bit. Indianapolis is at New England. Start or sit Michael Pitt. Michael Pittman.
I think he's a good number 3 receiver for this week. We'll see what Christian Gonzalez does. But the Patriots have been really bad against just everything in the last 2 games. And Jalen Waddle had a big game. We saw both Rams receivers have big games 2 weeks prior. There's a lot to like about the situation here for him, because 15 targets in his last 2 games, no Josh Downs. Anthony Richardson's looking for him. So, just given the setup, I don't think you want to go all in and say must start receiver in 2 receiver leagues. But in 3 receiver leagues, I think he should be back in your good graces given the setup.
I'd start him over both the 49ers, over Waddle, over Christian Watson, over both the Chiefs.
Okay.
Some guys.
Cleveland at Denver. I find this game to be super intriguing. How do you approach the Cleveland wide receivers, Heath?
Do we think that Jerry Jeudy's going to get the shadow? Like, if Cedric Tillman shows up, does that help Jerry Jeudy not get the shadow? I'm right now, I've got Jeudy as a borderline number 2. I've got Elijah Moore as kind of a mid wide receiver 3. I would start Elijah Moore over all the guys I just said that I would start Michael Pittman over.
And then you would obviously, okay. And where did you
Jeudy
say
and Moore over those guys, yes.
And so right now we're not projecting Cedric Tillman. We're not ranking him. Here's something weird. So when Tillman went out in week 12, Jerry Jeudy played about, I want to say more than 60% of his snaps in the slot, and Elijah Moore played more outside. It was strange. I don't really understand why, but that did happen. All right, Chargers are at Atlanta. Jamey, do you like a tight end in this game? Will Dissly, Kyle Pitts. You like a tight end in this game?
I currently have Pitts ranked ahead of Dissly. By the time we get to tomorrow, I'll probably move Dissly ahead of Pitts. It's a bad matchup. Chargers just allowed their first touchdown to a tight end last week, which was Mark Andrews. Pitts has scored less than 3 PPR points in 2 of his last 3 games. He's only scored he only has a game with a touchdown. He had 2 of them since week 1. So given the setup for both of these guys, I think it's safer to say that Dissly can get to that 8-point mark more so than Pitts can. So I'll give Dissly the slight nod over Pitts.
All right, Philadelphia is at Baltimore. Starter sit Zay Flowers.
Start.
Low end starter, but he's got to pick it up. I mean, it feels like the Broncos game, which obviously is one of the tougher matchups, was the last time we saw him really play like the player I think he's capable of. And that's, I think, a credit more to Lamar Jackson than really a discredit to Zay Flowers, because he's spreading the ball around and we're seeing other guys step up like Rashad Bateman last week. And the run game's obviously been so successful for Baltimore. But, Flowers is just not, I think, ascended to the heights that we've hoped for him to get to. He's just not getting enough targets and not scoring enough touchdowns. But he's got that in his bag still. And I don't think the matchup is one that you completely run away from.
Would you start Zay Flowers, or how about James Conner at Minnesota?
Flowers in PPR.
Yeah, I don't love that matchup for Conner.
Okay. Zay Flowers or Bucky Irving?
Bucky.
Rashad White?
Oh,
Zay.
Flowers.
Okay. San Francisco's at Buffalo. Is there a top 24 wide receiver in this game?
No.
I think I have Khalil Shakir just inside. He was Keon Coleman's back, and he did get a partial practice in. So if Keon Coleman's back, then no.
Yeah, I'm like a little hesitant to make too much of this stat, but the 49ers are really bad against the slot. 26th in yards allowed to wide receivers out of the slot, third most yards per catch to wide receivers out of the slot. This stat has sort of led me astray, but now we're 12 weeks into the season, and they struggle against slot. And Diamador Lenore is injured too, but obviously Shakir being the slot guy, that could be a good matchup for him. Pittsburgh is at Cincinnati. Are you starting a Steelers running back? Anybody want to start a Steelers running back? And if so, which one?
I would prefer not to. I mean, the Bengals are number 8 in fewest fantasy points allowed to the position, and they are actually number 1 in fewest receiving yards allowed to running backs. They are number 4 in fewest receptions allowed to running backs, and they are one of 4 teams yet to allow a touchdown catch to a running back. So we got Seattle at the Jets. Dave, if everybody is healthy, meaning DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, everybody for the Jets, who is the best wide receiver in this game?
So I have Garrett Wilson ranked the highest, but the heart wants to say Jackson Smith-Njigba. Just the way that he's been rolling, the fact that I still put a big question mark on whether or not the Seahawks will be able to run the ball. I think there's a correlation there between Kenneth Walker's struggles and Jackson Smith-Njigba's rise. And I do expect Garrett Wilson to get back involved in a big way in the Jets offense. So G-Dubs is first, JSN's right behind him.
Heath, same order?
I've got it JSN, Metcalf, and then Wilson.
I have JSN, Wilson, Metcalf. It's interesting, though, that we all have Devontae Adams fourth. And again, we'll get into more of the receiving core there.
How do you know that I've got Adams ahead of Lockett?
You have Adams ahead of Lockett, yes. So he would be fifth. Lockett would be
fifth.
I
do. Yes.
We just got to make sure that DK Metcalf's out there. So it's something to keep an eye on. Rams at New Orleans. So Heath, in a 4-point for passing touchdown leagues, who is the best super flex? Matthew Stafford, Derek Carr, or Taysom Hill?
I will still go with Matthew Stafford. He and Derek Carr project for around 15 fantasy points. Taysom Hill projects for around 11, but I definitely want to start Taysom Hill because he's a tight end, and I don't want to start the other two guys.
Can I just remind everybody that in Taysom Hill's last game, yes, 41 PPR points, amazing, ridiculous. The game before that, 7. So there's definitely a low floor here on Taysom Hill.
Go back to the game before that, because that's the one I think that we should hope for.
In week 9, yeah, that was 16 PPR points, and that's not bad either. Like
7's not a low floor at tight end.
Moving forward,
7's not a low floor at tight end.
All right, we'll get into Taysom Hill in a second.
That's
all right,
true.
We got Tampa Bay at Carolina. Dave, who is the best running back in this game?
Ooh, I've got Chuba ranked the highest just because I know he's going to get every carry. I don't fear the matchup against Tampa. He's still going to continue to dominate those touches, even with Jonathan Brooks now in his second game. He's going to be first. Bucky Irving is second behind him, both top 20 fantasy running backs.
Yep, Chuba, then Bucky, both top 15 fantasy running backs.
I like Bucky better than Chuba, but to your point, Chuba is safer in terms of he's going to get the touches. So if you want to just go safest, I think it's Chuba. If you want to go, I think who has the highest upside, for me, it's Bucky Irving. Arizona at Minnesota. Heath, Marvin Harrison Jr. or Jordan Addison this week? Who do you like better?
I have Jordan Addison higher. They are both number 3 wide receivers, but and this could be a great game for Marvin Harrison because the Vikings see a lot of wide receiver targets. It's just that Marvin Harrison Jr. hasn't had a lot of targets since week 3.
That's a problem. And Addison's had at least 15 PPR points in each of his last 2, 3 of his last 4. I do worry a little bit about just how much passing the Vikings are going to have to do in this game. I think this is one where they might be able to give a big dose of the run, and that'll be enough for them to beat Arizona. So a little nervous about that, but I still think you have to view Addison as in the range of a number 3 wide receiver, even with nobody on bye this week. I do have Harrison ranked higher.
I would take Addison over Harrison, but I agree with Heath that they're both number 3 receivers. Not the best matchup for Addison, much better matchup for Harrison, but we'll see how that goes. Again, we'll break down the receivers for each team in a second. And then last game we have here for today's slate is Tennessee at Washington. Dave, who is the better flex in this game? Tony Pollard or Terry McLaurin?
McLaurin, because I don't believe in this Titans defense being as good as they were earlier in the year against the pass. I think Jaden Daniels started to click as a thrower in the second half last week, really more like the fourth quarter of last week. And I expect it to continue. I'd rather start McLaurin than Pollard.
So it was definitely Pollard when Tyjae Spears wasn't playing, at least for me.
Yeah.
Now it's basically a coin flip, and like McLaurin could go have an 80-yard touchdown, but there's that risk that he hasn't had more than 6 targets in a game since October, and they've played 4 games in November.
There's also risk with Pollard, though. Now that with Spears back, if Washington builds a lead, we've seen games in the second half where Pollard barely plays, and it's a whole lot of Tyjae Spears.